What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Something curious has been happening behind the scenes back in Russia in the midst of all the global noise about Donald Trump policies, peace summit in Riyadh, inflation spikes, and shifting geopolitical puzzles. While many were busy dissecting US domestic affairs or going through the latest financial data, the Russian political scene quietly turned another page in its perpetual saga of power struggles and bizarre demotions. The center of attention this time is Lieutenant General Andrei Gurulev, who was once famous for his outrageous military conspiracy theories and calls to rain down destruction on Russia's alleged enemies. Such as, for example, the need to annihilate 20% of Russian population because they do not unconditionally support Putin, so that this elimination will motivate other hesitating citizens to reconsider their political views. By the way, this was not considered as an extremist statement, but saying out loud "war" in a supermarket will get you 8 years in jail. You just don't understand, guys. It's different. And basically what happened is that this guy Andrei Gurulev, he flew too close to the sun in his crazy attempts to satisfy Putin with his ridiculous suggestions, and so he got quietly laid to rest. Russian style, obviously. Speaking in professional bureaucratic language, he got sidelined for the State Duma's Defense Committee to a much less prestigious role. The example of Gurulev epitomizes the fate of those who buy too wholeheartedly into the regime's shifting storylines. He was loud, proud, and fully committed, until he wasn't needed. Until he became so ridiculously outrageous that even Kremlin masterminds realized, wait a second, well, that's too much already, you gotta slow down a little bit. So today, while still waiting on some news worth reporting about the Riyadh summit, let's talk about this typical fate of a Russian government representative who gave everything to be noticed by his superiors, just to be discarded later like a useless trash. Personalist autocracies, like the one presiding over Russia, have a reputation for trying to appear unstoppable even as they walk on very thin ice. They present themselves as fortresses of formidable tradition and ironclad convictions. They steer the pot with threats of war, expansions, and moral crusades. They hold up references to historical glory days, or at least half-imagined interpretations of them, and exploit public figures of external enemies to cement the unity. But anyone looking closely sees that none of these stances are carved in stone. The Russian government has rarely, if ever, articulated a coherent set of goals or values. It endorses war without calling it one, trumpets alliances only to later betray them, and fosters illusions of grand missions that can be abandoned literally overnight. You don't need to go far for examples. That's why I'm always so confused why there are nations and country leaders who still trust whatever Putin promises them. Such friendship, quote-unquote, lasts only for as long as it is beneficial for Putin, either financially or politically. And since Putin is probably the only person on the entire earth who is no longer concerned about the concept of money, think about it, who is ever gonna say no to him? The only thing that he still wishes to extract from such alliances is more power and influence. And once he sucks every last drop out of you, you are discarded as an empty, dry husk. That's exactly what happened to Andrei Gurulev. We're gonna speak about his case in more details in a couple of minutes. Back to lies, deceptions, and betrayals that the Russian authorities are willing to undertake in order to achieve their goals. In 2014, for example, the regime conjured an entire mythology about the Russian world and how it needed to be defended from make-believe villains. Television channels overflowed with horror stories of banderovцы and fascists lurking just over the border. If you ever say a word in Russian or even speak in Ukrainian with Russian accent, they will come after you, kidnap you and your family at night, and sacrifice you to the nearer resurrection of Lord Stepan Bandera, which will then purify Ukraine from the wrong people. After all is done, this is when the stage 2 of Zelensky's master plan begins, which involves recreating the Third Reich in Ukraine and invading the rest of Europe, sailing across the Atlantic Ocean and taking the power in the Washington as well. And the only ones who are safe from the wrath of Devil Zelensky are his personal distributors of good stuff from South America. Believe it or not, guys, but this was seriously discussed by major Russian TV networks during prime time for years. and many people still believe in it. So no wonder they see Putin as the last vanguard that shields the entire planet from Ukraine, and so they volunteer to risk their lives in a cause that sounds so noble. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storyline was tossed aside. That's it. The official mouthpieces dialed down the absurdity, and the conflict was no longer the top item on the national to-do list. Many misled soldiers who took the government's rhetoric at face value found themselves in a life-threatening situation. With the media spotlight shifted, no one was there to applaud their heroics. And just like that, Russia received a new layer of society which will go through mental-altering experience, come back with violent combat skills, and will constantly feel abandoned by the society they thought will praise them as true heroes and saviors. Lieutenant General Andrei Gurulov is the latest high-profile reminder of how quickly fortunes change when you cling too closely to any single script. He served in the Russian military for decades, far from the glitz of Moscow's political circles. No one outside specialized defense circles even knew his name. And then came the conflict in Ukraine, and suddenly channels needed fresh faces to spread grandiose claims about how Russia was prevailing on all fronts. And sure, it was the job of Igor Konashenkov at first, but after reporting on destroying 20 HIMARSs, 15 F-16s, 50 Abrams tanks and 30 Black Hawks in a single day, by a single soldier, twice, well, people obviously stopped believing the official reports by the Ministry of Defense of Russia. They started to need someone close to the people, quote-unquote. Someone who looks like them, speaks like them, and is not afraid to behave like a regular person. All that pretentious formal reporting style became foreign for regular people. And so, Gurulev, with his plain-spoken swagger, fits the bill perfectly. He was invited to every TV talk show he could attend, while simultaneously praising the retreat from Kiev as a brilliant strategic move and forecasting the swift capture of other territories. In order to move forward, we have to step back, he said, almost literal his quote. No matter how far-fetched these claims were, they kept him in the spotlight, mainly because of the way he was talking, his body language, the expressions, and the word usage, lexicon, and phrases that simple Russians use. So they understood him perfectly well. He became their voice to the government that never listens. His exaggerated statements grew from praising strategic withdrawals to openly advocating nuclear strikes on Western capitals and calling for using secret bioweapons to target Anglo-Saxons. And yes, that's yet another crazy conspiracy theory that was heavily pushed in Russia at some point, that some sort of a bioweapon that affects people with only a very specific DNA exists. So yeah, at first such theatrics were precisely what state TV producers wanted. Ratings soared whenever a uniformed retired general promised the glorious devastation of faraway cities. But the truth about personalist autocracies is that they only find extremism useful when it aligns with the daily narrative. The second your word becomes a liability or a stray from your day's official story, now you become the problem. Simple as that. The Russian government rarely wants genuine zealotry existing uncontrollably, because it needs to keep all doors open for quick pivot. And so once Gurulev began loudly criticizing Minister of Defense failures, sharing damaging accounts about missing uniforms or incompetent top officials, he crossed the line. He was no longer championing patriotic fury as the narrative demanded. He was instead shining a light on corruption within an institution that is supposed to remain outside of anyone's reach. State TV wants bloodthirsty calls to defend the motherland, not revelations of embarrassing logistical failures. That was the beginning of an end for his short-lived prime-time celebrity. The peculiar brilliance of the regime's flexibility lies in its ability to discard any storyline or individual the moment they outlive their usefulness. You see it at every turn. When the big guys need mass mobilization, they crank up the fear or the patriotism. When too many men show reluctance, the government floats new materialistic incentives, from cancelled debt to substantial sign-up bonuses. If that does not work, they young people off the streets to intimidate them into enlisting. In all these maneuvers, the official line can shift abruptly. One day you hear about the existential threat that justifies the mobilization of half of the country, and then, with the flick of a switch, officials pivot to calmer tones, saying, "We have guys everything under control, don't worry." The earlier rallying cry recedes now obviously into the background. That's exactly why the regime grows annoyed with anyone who clings obsessively to last month's propaganda bulletins. People like Gurulev attach themselves to a version of the story that is beneficial to them, not realizing that their superiors decided to recalibrate their efforts. Maybe the government sees that the public's appetite for more extreme rhetoric is waning, or it wants the option to negotiate. And suddenly, the big loud voices from last week's war mania become an obstacle, because they remind everybody of the promises or threats the regime no longer wants to keep. The system requires that each participant memorizes only the current talking points and throws away yesterday's convictions, like an old trash. In this environment, a man who cannot or will not adapt is out of luck. That's the hallmark of personalistic rule. The ever-changing tapestry of half-truths, illusions, and ephemeral alliances, all designed to keep the core leadership in power indefinitely. Now, Gurulev finds himself stripped of his once hailed position in the Defense Committee. Officially, it's just a lateral move to the Regional Politics Committee, but everyone knows what it really means. He made too much noise, outlived his entertainment value, and threatened to undermine the cohesive facade of a united front. He's not the first to face such a fate. Bigger names, like Yevgeny Prigozhin, learned a much harsher lesson. Another figure, Igor Girkin, ended up locked away when his services became no longer needed to the state's narrative. It's not that the government has some moral objection to men who champion mass violence or entertain apocalyptic fantasies. The real objection is that these men can become too independent or too entrenched in their own versions of the official line. By demoting Gurulev, the Kremlin signals that even the most outspoken loyalists need to watch their step. The system is about preserving maximum room to maneuver. They will not care about even the most loyal propagandists when the regime is in danger. Anyone who tries to weld themselves to a fixed position, an unchanging ideology, or permanent sense of mission risks unraveling the carefully balanced illusions. In personalist autocracies, the capacity to forget yesterday's agenda is a political survival skill. Fall behind on that skill and you share the fate of a man no longer useful, a living reminder of all the disclaimers the state wants to retract. And if you think about it, being discarded like a useless body is one of the best outcomes such people can get. If you keep making noises and trying to grab onto the last bits of relevancy, well then you might be cast into the oblivion. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. I found some very interesting footage from Ukraine, and if you want to see it, it will be on my Patreon. The link is down below. It's also one of the best ways to support the work. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe